Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Gloria Gervasio and thank you for your interest and participation at this very important event. I am the director of the EU's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission Raleigh Area Office. It is my honor to serve you as your Region 4 lead for the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders Regional Network. In 2013, the White House Initiative on Asian Americans established the regional network as a way to build relationships between the federal government and the AA and NHPI communities across the country. We're very excited to host this roundtable. I've invited members of the White House, federal agencies, and
join the meeting.
And NHPI advocates, as well as community leaders from across the 8 states in Region 4. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. It brings a wide range of federal government officials from the area to talk about different issues impacting AA and NHPI communities and share resources here in the Southeast. The Department of Justice is here to share resources on reporting anti-Asian hate crimes. We'll also introduce Southeast Regional Network members and our federal partners. We'll provide breakout sessions to engage our federal partners with AA and NHPI communities across the Southeast and share resources and challenges. The Department of Housing and Urban Development will discuss housing and environmental justice issues. I know healthcare and social services are a major interest to our community, especially over these past few years. So we'll have representatives from the Census Bureau, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Social Security Administration. Finally, we have our federal representatives who can speak towards and provide resources for education and economic development issues and immigration, labor, and workers' rights. This truly is a comprehensive event, and the community's participation is vital to ensuring government resources and information is shared. Before we begin, we want to remind everyone that this event is closed to media. We have live transcripts available as well as various interpretation services in Cantonese, Mandarin, Korean, and Vietnamese. And with that being said, I turn it over to Crystal Ka'ai, our Executive Director for the White House Initiative for Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. Crystal?
Thank you, Glory. I'm so grateful for your leadership and just the work that you have been doing and all of our other members here in Region 4 and Southeast to ensure that we are able to advance equity, justice, and opportunity for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community. As Glory mentioned, my name is Crystal Ka'ai, and I serve as the Executive Director of this White House Initiative, as well as the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. And we are so grateful to all of you today for joining us. As we work to really ensure that we are able to re-engage with the AA and NHPI community here in the Southeast and all across the country. We just had a really great national stakeholder event for Women's History Month, in which we also mark the 1-year anniversary of the horrific spa shootings that occurred in Atlanta last year. And in fact, just last week, myself, our Deputy Director for the initiative, and Erica Moritsugu from the White House, you will be hearing from shortly, we're able to actually go down to Georgia for the anniversary date and to be with local community leaders to mark that anniversary. And so I just want to thank all of you. We know how challenging the past 2 years have been with the pandemic, and especially with the uptick in anti-Asian hate and violence we have seen that continues, unfortunately, to this day. So we know that there's a lot of work to do. But again, it's why we wanted to make sure that all of you have access to our White House Initiative, to the federal resources that are provided, and also to the incredible members of our regional network who are federal officials based in your states and in your regions who can directly connect you with resources and ensure that you have access to the federal government, and that we can ensure that we're elevating the needs and concerns of the AA and NHPI community at the highest levels. So just want to thank all of you again for being here today. We look forward to continued opportunities to engage, and please know that this will be the first of many ongoing conversations that we hope to have with all of you. So with that, I will turn it back over to Glory.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Mahalo. We turn it over now to Erica Moritsugu, the Deputy Assistant to the President and AA and NHPI Senior Liaison to the White House. Erica?
Mahalo, Glory. Aloha, y'all. Thank you so much to WHIAANHPI's leadership in this meeting. to pull together this important convening. We've got hundreds of folks logged on in the middle of a workday, in the middle of the week. So I'm so grateful to be in this space with y'all. As Crystal mentioned, last week marked the 1-year anniversary of the Atlanta spa murders of 6 women of Asian descent and 2 others. I was grateful for the opportunity to be alongside some of the victims' families and members of the Atlanta community to honor the memories of the victims and the beautiful lives that they led. With a lot of thanks to Crystal and Rebecca for their collegiality and presence and sisterhood in going down there together. It was an honor to deliver the message of solidarity and healing on behalf of Vice President Harris and from President Biden, and to unite with community members and leaders against the scourge of hate and racism, which we continue to fight today. The 1-year anniversary of the Atlanta murders fell in the wake of the recent tragic murders and hateful attacks of members of the AA and NHPI communities. In January, Christina Yuna Lee, Michelle Go were murdered in New York City. Last month, Gwen Ma succumbed to her injuries. And something that we barely heard anything about, 2 Asian women were gunned down by separate assailants in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Barely heard anything about that. We have to ask why. These are, of course, just a few examples of the violence AA and NHPI women have been facing, and we've seen more attacks in just the last week. But since the beginning of this administration, President Biden and Vice President Harris have made it a priority to address not only the spikes in anti-Asian and gender-based violence. I was heartened to hear President Biden raise awareness for this at a national level in a State of the Union address and reaffirm his commitment to our communities. While we're proud of what we've achieved in our first year of the administration, we do recognize that there is still a lot of work to be done in combating these long-standing systemic prejudices and to ensure that Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander women and their families and communities are not only safe from the threat of violence, but are empowered and able to thrive. Thank you again for your invaluable work in this regional network, and Glory for your leadership. Mahalo for the opportunity to join you. I'll turn it back to you, Glory.
I'm sorry, we're having technical difficulty. Glory, will you please start again?
Mahalo again, Erica, for your leadership and your support from the White House. And now we turn it over to Victoria Gwen, your Commissioner for the White House Initiative for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. Victoria?
Thank you so much, Glory. And as we reflect and remember the victims of March 16th mass shooting that killed 8 people, including 6 AAPI women in communities impacted by violence, and also celebrating Women History Month, I send my well wishes to everyone on the call and during this time of healing and action. I'm Tori Nguyen, a commissioner of the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, and also a senior vice president and chief officer of external affairs at the Center for Asian Community Services here in Atlanta. It's an honor to be appointed to President Biden's Advisory Commission on AA and HPI community. And, you know, I look forward to working on important issues like affecting AA and HPI communities, such as language access, data disaggregation, anti-Asian hate, and disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on AA and HPI communities. And as commissioner and part of the community-based organizations in Region 4, I look forward to working with all of you as we continue engagement and partnership in connecting local to regional to federal and working on issues together. And so feel free to reach out to me in the event that I could help support on some of these issues in Region 4. And so thank you again to Erica, Crystal, the WHIAANHPI team, as well as Glory and the federal team here in Region 4 and your leadership. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and your ongoing support as well, especially here in the Southeast. Really do appreciate you. And despite less media attention, the issue of anti-Asian hate and bias is ongoing for our community. According to a recent study by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, the number of reported anti-Asian hate crime across a dozen of America's largest city has increased 339% over the past year. In particular, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander women have been disproportionately targeted throughout the pandemic, with nearly 3 in 4 of these women experiencing racism or discrimination over the past 12 months. According to a new survey by the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, Under the Biden and Harris administration, the White House initiative has made tackling anti-Asian hate and discrimination a top priority. Within his first week in office, President Biden issued a presidential memorandum instructing the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services to work with the AA and NHPI community in finding solutions to combating anti-Asian hate and bias and addressing cultural competency, language access, and sensitivity towards our community. A key part of this agenda, improving safety, access to justice, and violence prevention for AA and NHPI communities, preventing, addressing, and better tracking acts of hate and bias. We're very fortunate to invite our federal partners from the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security to share their resources on anti-Asian hate and bias. But first, we'd like to introduce Natalie Kalas, the Acting Regional Director and Executive Officer for the Office of for Health and Human Services. Natalia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Kalas, and I'm the Acting Regional Director. Thank you so much for having me with you all today. I see some of my colleagues also from Region 4, OASH, OCR, and CMS also on the line as well. Well, thank you for convening this important conversation today. I'm truly honored to represent HHS Region 4 at today's event. We also are very proud to represent HHS to be the home of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. So it's both a pleasure and a privilege to join the conversation. As many of you know, for too long, systematic barriers to equality, equity, justice, and opportunities have put the American dream out of reach for many of the AA and NHPI communities. Racism, definitely against AA and NHPI communities, continue to threaten the safety and dignity of countless families in America. And unfortunately, the AA and NHPI women have been disproportionately impacted with targeted anti-Asian violence, as we saw recently. We are at an inflection point in our country's history, but we know that we really have a choice to make. We have a choice to build back a better country where we prioritize equity and justice, or we can actually just choose to sit back with the status quo and do nothing about it. I'm proud to be part of this administration and during this time of this administration, and also under the leadership of Secretary Becerra, as we've chosen to progress and move forward. Over the past year, we have worked to expand health equity in the AA and NHPI communities by ensuring that people have access to the COVID vaccine and therapeutics and testing and masking and quality health care. Today, there are a variety of efforts, including culturally competent messages and partnerships with all of you. More than 211 million Americans, many of whom come from these communities, have received their COVID vaccine doses, either 2 or 1 dose of the vaccine. This hasn't happened by chance. We have routinely engaged the AA and NHPI communities in our vaccine confidence work. For instance, we have launched a lot of campaigns like the Slow to Spread campaign and Building Vaccine Confidence campaign, which has launched in 14 different AA and NHPI languages as well. Through the American Rescue Plan, there's been millions of funding made available, which have lowered and eliminated health insurance premiums for millions of lower and middle income families who enrolled in the health insurance marketplace, which also included 197,000 uninsured AA and NHPI individuals. Now a record of 14.5 million Americans have quality, affordable coverage through the marketplaces as well. We're making some advancements also in the cancer space. So the Cancer Moonshot is a lifeline to Asian and Pacific Islander men who are twice as likely to die from stomach cancer as compared to non-Hispanic white men, and to Asian and Pacific Islander women who are 2.5 times as likely to die from the same disease as compared to non-Hispanic white women. In the first year of the Biden-Harris administration, we've invested $1 billion to support family violence and prevention and services programs. And finally, we have invested billions of dollars to expand the healthcare workforce, and we have prioritized the behavioral health of children, youth, and their families with an emphasis on improving access to care while promoting equity and fostering innovations. There's several resources that we provide here at the department. One in particular I want to highlight is through our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which many of you know as SAMHSA. They have several AANHPI resources related to mental health, substance abuse use available at our samhsa.gov website. Lastly, if you're seeking help in coping with mental health or emotional effects from the current and past trauma events, especially also dealing with COVID, any national disasters or such, you can also call or text the Disaster Distress Helpline, and that's 1-800-985-5990. All right, and lastly, as I close out, there is a call to action that HHS is hoping that we can get more buy-in from the AA and NHPI communities, from addressing anti-Asian hate and bias to COVID-19 recovery, to collecting better data on AA and NHPI communities and providing resources for limited English proficiency individuals. We need everyone's help to be at the table in order for us to do a widespread, unique, and urgent community outreach. So my ask on behalf of HHS is really simple. Continue to be our partner. I see our partners from CPACs on, and many of you who've been at the forefront with us, working in your communities. Continue to help us turn the dial of progress. Help us get it right. Help us get it together. Let's fight anti-Asian biases. Let's promote health equity. And let's ensure that the AA and NHPI families are not only recovering from the crisis confronted with them yesterday and today, but we're working together to build the communities across America. And I thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. We appreciate your leadership and support. And now turning it over to Jikita Bass, the Associate Director of Field Operations East for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, CP3. Jikita?
Thank you, Glory. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me today. I am Jikita Bass, as Glory mentioned, with the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships. I serve as the Associate Director for Field Operations, covering the East Coast, and I'm also the Regional Prevention Coordinator for Georgia, the Carolinas, and Kentucky. The department, along with CP3, we are highly concerned about the increase in violence in our communities, especially the targeted violence against the Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islander community. We stand against targeted violence of any kind. We will continue to utilize our resources and maximize our efforts to combat acts of targeted violence such as these, and to help keep our communities safe and secure. On February 27, 2021, over a year ago, on behalf of the department, the DHS's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties issued a statement in support of the AANHPI communities, condemning the recent hateful attacks. We mean it and we stand by it. Over the past several years, the United States has experienced an increasing number of targeted attacks by angry and disaffected individuals motivated by a combination of extremist ideologies and personal grievances. This includes individuals motivated by racial and or ethnic tensions, as well as those motivated by gender biases. Every time a threat or an attack like this happens, people often wonder, how can we prevent this from happening again? And this is what my office does. My office works with communities to prevent acts of targeted violence and terrorism, which includes attacks on schools, workplaces, public gatherings, and other settings. CP3 is a center within DHS, which seeks a resilient America where communities are united to help end targeted violence and terrorism. Although we do not lead prevention and intervention activities, we work with whole of society partners like you to offer educational, technical, and financial support to medium and long-term efforts to establish and expand local prevention frameworks throughout communities to reduce violence in the first place. This involves digging into the roots of the problem, addressing societal needs, getting help to those vulnerable to violent extremism, providing education and public awareness, and interrupting the pathway to violence before law enforcement gets involved or a criminal investigation is needed. It is critical that we have everyone at the table to understand the issues, identify the gaps, and to identify solutions to fill those gaps. CP3 is working with local stakeholders to establish and expand local prevention frameworks that inform bystanders, prompt them to act, and provide the counseling and other services that form threat management plans. In engaging whole of society partners, CP3 seeks to ensure that individuals, organizations, and localities can protect themselves against acts of targeted violence and terrorism, and implementing promising practices to prevent individuals from engaging in acts of targeted violence and terrorism. We support these local efforts through technical assistance offered by our 15 regional prevention coordinators located throughout the country, who support communities in building local prevention frameworks and educational assistance through a wide range of community awareness briefings and digital forums. Many of our regional prevention coordinators will be attending and partnering on their regional calls for the
Join the meeting.
We also offer financial assistance via grants. Over the last 2 years, DHS has provided state and local stakeholders with $30 million to fund projects focused on preventing domestic violent extremism, enhancing local threat assessment and management capabilities, implementing innovative solutions for preventing targeted violence and terrorism, and challenging online violence mobilization narratives. We have funded several colleges and university projects to increase societal and bystander awareness and to build the capacity of threat assessment and threat management teams. We are anticipating that the 2022 Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Notice of Funding Opportunity will be released in the next few weeks. We have numerous resources available to support efforts to prevent targeted violence. I will put my contact information in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me with questions or if you would like more information. Once again, thank you for inviting me. And again, it takes all of us to prevent senseless acts of targeted violence. With our collaborative partnerships and efforts, we can make our communities more resilient and help our communities to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jikita. Turning it over to Zachary Williams now from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He is the Protective Security Advisor. Zachary.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zach Williams, and I work for the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I am one of 3 Protective Security Advisors here in the state of Georgia. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, leads the national effort to protect and enhance the nation's physical and cyber infrastructure. We also work to gather the best of cybersecurity and infrastructure security knowledge and practices, and then share that with our stakeholders to better inform risk management. PSAs, or the Protective Security Advisors, are physical security experts who work to protect facilities, critical infrastructure, community centers, our mass gathering sites, and our houses of worship. This is accomplished through a no-cost physical security assessment. These assessments consist of a questionnaire and a site survey where we provide recommendations and options to consider to address physical vulnerabilities identified on site. Additionally, we offer training in the realm of active shooter preparedness and bomb threat management. These assessments are a vital step in preventing acts of violence by hardening our facilities and making it harder for our adversaries to attack our communities. And lastly, these assessments feed into the federal grant funding available to nonprofits to increase their overall physical security. If you're interested in these free assessments or training opportunities, I will drop my information as well as a link for more information here in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. Really do appreciate that information. He'll be dropping his information in the chat very shortly. With that being said, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Dion Lyons, who is the Conciliation Specialist for the U.S. Department of Justice. Dion, I will stop my screen. Dion, you're on mute. Did you want to unmute yourself?
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Good, good. As stated, my name is Dion Lyons. I am a conciliation specialist responsible for responding to community concerns in the states of Georgia and North Carolina. Your question may be, what is a conciliation specialist? And I'm sure most people have never heard of one, or maybe never even heard of CRS for that matter, because we tend to not engage with the press and we don't get much publicity, primarily because CRS prefers to work in the background and give the glory to the community organizations that we work with. But for your information, and so that you'll understand what we do and how we do it, a conciliation specialist is, among other things, a glorified mediator. So I'm also an organizer and a facilitator of community dialogue. We're also pretty good at addressing those roadblocks in communications between community activists and government or elected entities. So conciliation specialists are CRS's field staff. But let's go back one. And what is CRS? Before I get into the details of the Atlanta spa shootings in specific, and a few other cases I'd like to talk about, I'd like to give you a little background on what the Department of Justice Community Relations Service is and how we work, so that those details can be in context. Next slide, please. So the Department of Justice's Community Relations Service is an agency within the Department of Justice that is one of the smallest agencies within DOJ. There's only about 30 of us total employees spread throughout the country in 10 regional offices and a few satellites. I work out of the Atlanta office, which is the Southeast Regional Headquarters. CRS was established by the Civil Rights Act of '64, which President Johnston signed into law. And that act gave us the authority, and we became the federal government's peacemaker. At least that's what we like to call ourselves. So we deal with community tensions or conflicts based on differences in race, color, and national origin. That was our original mandate. But while the Civil Rights Act created CRS, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act further expanded CRS's jurisdiction. We can move to the next slide, and you'll see that since the passage of that act, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act in 2009, that President Obama signed into law. On the next slide. CRS has worked with communities to develop the capacity to prevent and respond to alleged hate crimes that were committed on the basis of either actual or perceived gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, disability, race, color, and of course, national origin. So let's look at those key pillars under which CRS services are built. Next slide, please. So at the foundation of CRS services are these four pillars. Impartiality. CRS serves as a neutral third party when delivering services, avoiding at all costs the perception of partiality. CRS does not advocate on behalf of any party. Additionally, CRS does not investigate, find fault with, or issue opinions for or against any party, ever. The next pillar, we're voluntary. CRS can't force parties to engage with us. Basically, parties choose to engage with us if they feel that we are helpful, trustworthy, and have confidence in us. So we have to build that rapport with every stakeholder we try to engage with. Participation and use of CRS services are always by choice, and anyone can freely leave the process at any time without fear of retribution, or sanctions, or any of those punitive consequences. Our next pillar is confidentiality. So when we're delivering our services, CRS does not share anything said or written during the conflict resolution process. Even the identities of those involved, unless the parties want to be known, is strictly confidential. Who invited CRS? Who asked for our services? That's all strictly confidential. And any information that the press requests,
Miami, Florida.
Join the meeting.
So we don't generally talk directly to the press. We send them to our press secretary back at headquarters. There's also no cost to any of the services that CRS provides to any stakeholder. So CRS is the only federal agency dedicated to assisting state and local governments and private and public organizations and community groups with preventing and resolving racial and ethnic tensions, hate crimes, community-based racial conflicts, and civil disorders. So if we go on to the next slide, I can say a little more about how this all works. And let's take a closer look at our services. Facilitation. It can take many different forms. The first and the most formal is where CRS is actively convening and aiding in the dialogue and problem-solving process between stakeholders in joint sessions. In this process, CRS works with the stakeholders to develop meeting agendas, establish meeting goals and ground rules, and imagine a meeting that includes multiple stakeholders gathered around the table and CRS in the front of the room facilitating that meeting. That's what facilitation looks like if we can get it to that level. Then there's mediation. It's a structured process where the parties are convened by CRS to problem solve and develop solutions and agreements. In this process, CRS works with the stakeholders to develop 8 agendas, establish meeting goals and ground rules, and additionally, CRS will provide a structured understanding or agreement or some other form of written document. Not all of them are quite that formal. So that's why there's the facilitation process as well. Consultation is simply we provide stakeholders technical assistance on best practices or resources that may assist in conflict resolution or capacity building. And then training. Training allows CRS to and get our subject matter experts involved so we can provide technical knowledge and assistance and skills based on programs to community leaders and stakeholders or law enforcement or city officials or others. Next slide, please. CRS offers its services to various organizations. Now, they can be community and civil rights leaders, they can be city, they can be county, they can be state and federal officials, they can be elected officials, they can be schools, districts, communities, they can be American Indian tribes, they can be law enforcement, and they can be faith-based leaders. They're very often amongst those who we deal with. So what exactly does CRS do? Next slide. We'll talk briefly to the 3 general areas that we work within. This is what we did in 2020, the fiscal year that's 1 year removed so far. 145 dialogues, 424 consultation sessions, 11 training sessions, and realize there's only 30 of us across the country. But let's go ahead and get into the more of the details of what we do on the next slide. I'd like to bring it down to my level. Most of the folks on this call are probably well above my pay grade. I am field staff. So on a typical day, I monitor the news and the social media for articles indicating community tension arising from any of those 8 protected areas I spoke about earlier. And we also conduct outreach to stakeholders within our territories to encourage them to let us know about potential problems that we might be able to help with before they become newsworthy. When a potential case arises, we start conducting an assessment to ensure that the issue is jurisdictional. And then this usually involves traveling to the location and meeting with the stakeholders involved on all sides of any potential problem. And at that point, CRS will work with community leaders and devise an action plan designed to reduce tension or resolve potential problems. Let's get into some of those potential problems. Next slide, please. So CRS has 3 service areas I mentioned earlier: the administration of justice, education, and general community relations. CRS work in the administration of justice area involves law enforcement, police, sheriffs, district attorneys, tribal authorities, and other criminal justice institutions. In education, we work with schools, school districts, universities, colleges. And although CRS's work doesn't generally directly address bullying, at least not exclusively, CRS can offer consultation services to identify the experts and resources that will assist with bullying. CRS may also conduct a school spirit, which is a program I'll get into more detail with. It helps to address tension and conflict and all kinds of underlying problems at an educational institution. And finally, CRS works in the general community relations area that can include community institutions and others. And these are generally the ones that get the most news attention and become large issues. Next slide, please. Those are the ones that go viral. So here you can see a list of current CRS programs that are available under each of those 3 service areas. And more information on these programs can be found on CRS's website, which I'll make sure that everyone has on this list. Maybe you've heard of some of the work that we've done without even realizing it. So here's an example of what we've done throughout some of the regions. We'll get into the details now of some of the cases that you've heard about on the next slide, please. So here are some of the things that we particularly do. Hate crimes panel generally focuses on hate crimes and bias incidents in the general community. CRS also has a separate forum that focuses on hate crimes and bias incidents that were committed against places of worship. The hate crimes panel is one of the endeavors that we tried to put in place after the Atlanta spa shootings. But forums may not be the right tool immediately following a hate crime or a bias incident. If community members are looking for a space to process their reactions to the incident, so rather in these situations, CRS could consider a community dialogue or other process that's designed for venting or heightened emotions. So in a minute, I'll focus on the Atlanta spa shootings, which occurred here last year, and how we approached that incident and its aftermaths. So a hate crimes forum, it puts the focus on hate crimes to provide tools and information to help communities better protect themselves by having a broader discussion of hate crimes, laws, and resources. And the outcome for hate crimes forums is to create a working group and a network with subject matter experts, community members, law enforcement, to come together and share ideas and best practices and resources that may prevent or respond to bias incidents and hate crimes. Then there's the PPOW forum, which is protecting places of worship. And that's to provide tools and information to help communities better protect themselves by establishing the basic security measures for faith-based members and buildings. And it's become a significant enough issue that we had to have a specific forum created just for that purpose. Next slide, please. So CRS is building partnerships. The programs are not just for another cultural awareness training. Our programs are unique in several ways. We try to keep our content as current as possible. We use the latest statistics and well-respected sources without an advocacy agenda, because we have to stay neutral. All our information has been vetted by subject matter experts and community leaders, so it affects and reflects the concerns and the viewpoints of all parties. The programs are more than just informative, they're also engaging, using the best of adult learning techniques to try to have folks retain and be able to process the information they receive. And we've had quite a bit of success on several different partnership engagement programs, but we don't currently have a program for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander agenda. So unfortunately, that program doesn't exist. If you go to the next slide, you'll see an example of another one that we do have that does exist, and that is to engage with the transgender communities. Also, very similar program. The primary goal is training that will leave you knowing more about the transgender communities than you did before, and that you'll use the tools, hopefully the helpful tips and the resources you receive to help plan your engagement with those communities. And the purpose of the training is to expand your powers of listening and observation, to see, hear, and understand transgender individuals better. That training provided the first steps, just the first steps on creating a community outreach plan for an agency such as a law enforcement agency. And we dive into those details and cover a few housekeeping and introductory matters. So as I've been promising, I want to go ahead and get into a few more details of the Atlanta spa shooting. On the next slide, please. Okay. Yes, we're going to move into the actual case studies. Next slide, please. So Oak Creek, Wisconsin did not occur here in the Southeast region. I was not personally involved in this case, but it is a very good example of some of the things that we do. So on Sunday, August the 5th in 2012, a white supremacist shot and killed 6 worshipers and wounded others when he attacked Oak Creek, a Sikh Wadara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Within hours of the shooting, CRS was in contact with national and local Sikh officials, the U.S. Attorney for the district, and numerous federal and local law enforcement officials, and the White House Council on faith-based and neighboring partnerships. So I want to use this as an example so you can put things in perspective, what happened here in Georgia. So CRS then helped facilitate communication between law enforcement and community members, providing contact information for key law enforcement officials. And CRS and the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin facilitated a key leadership meeting to discuss hate crimes, analyze community concerns over the shooting, conduct law enforcement, and assess the community needs for funerals. CRS and its federal partners then planned and moderated a larger community meeting the next day at Oak Creek High School. We did several other things, technical assistance, participated in numerous national and community calls with a total of over 200 participants following the shooting to identify resources and provide technical assistance and address concerns. Later that week, Attorney General Eric Holder delivered a speech honoring the victims and families affected by the tragedy at a memorial service on August the 10th. So let's go to Atlanta now. Next slide, please. Oh, not quite Atlanta yet, okay. So should be the next slide, maybe. Let's try the next one. I think, there we go. All right. So, sorry, I'm a little, my slides are off here as well. Make sure I have the right one. Give me 1 second. I made some specific notes on the Atlanta slide that I'm not seeming to find here, but since I was personally involved in it, I can speak to it myself. So on March 16th, I really want those notes though. I'm gonna ask you to bear with me just 1 second. hate having to wing it, especially in this forum. My apologies. So everyone is familiar with the tragedy that happened in Atlanta on March 16, 2021. 8 people were killed in a shooting spree, 6 of whom were Asian Americans. So CRS got involved because it was a national tragedy. We facilitated community dialogue between community leaders and law enforcement. But what I wanted to say and what I made notes about that I can't seem to find right now is that CRS, me, here in the Southeast region, did not already have working relationships with the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community here in Atlanta. Lacking those relationships, lacking having established those relationships in advance, it was very difficult for us to engage and build the trust that we needed in order for people to work with us at the last minute and in the middle of a crisis and a tragedy. And that was very difficult to overcome, but we worked with as many stakeholders as we could find and locate. What I actually had to do was to go to the protests and identify myself on site to the Asian American leaders who were taking control and taking charge and try to find out what it was that they needed so we could figure out how we could help them best. As you can imagine, that's pretty difficult in the middle of a tragedy. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know whether I was legitimate or not, because as most of you already are aware, most people don't know much about CRS or what a conciliation specialist is. So that was very difficult over time, and it took several attempts to engage with each of the many, many stakeholders that came out and began to work for the betterment of the AAPI community in Atlanta. It took many instances of me trying to establish who CRS was and who I was in order for them to trust me and work with me. That eventually happened. And we were working towards putting together a hate crimes forum. In fact, we had it all arranged. And there was another forum called a Unity Forum that I was putting together between the Asian American and Pacific Islander community and the NAACP and several prominent civil rights organizations here in Atlanta. The Asian American stakeholders here in the community decided that it was too soon, that the timing was not right, that things were, we needed time to heal, and that we were trying to probably do something that wasn't quite ripe in the wake of such a tragedy. And so we put those efforts, thank you. Someone found my notes for me that I couldn't find, so I appreciate you very much for that. So we did get on the ground and conduct that assessment, reached out to stakeholders immediately, but as I said, we didn't have well-established relationships. We did work with all levels of law enforcement with whom we already did have good relationships, so that when we attended all those protests, we worked to find community assistance and reassurance. CRS was instrumental, though, in improving law enforcement messaging regarding the investigation, because if you may recall, the initial messaging coming after the spa shootings was inaccurate and frankly frustrating and offensive to members of the AAPI community here. So CRS got involved there and fixed some of that messaging at the law enforcement level. We worked to try to identify ways to build bridges between the AAPI community and the Black community, Hispanic community. As I said, we conducted the hate crimes forum. We coordinated the hate crimes forum and the unity forum, but community leaders felt that that was too soon. If we can go on to the next slide. This is an ongoing thing. As I said, we didn't have programs in place like we did at the Wisconsin, during the Wisconsin tragedy and during tragedies that affected, say, the transgender community in other places. And so we are building those now, and CRS will be better prepared to respond. We also were dealing with a pandemic at the time, and travel was a little difficult. However, there are other case studies where we can show you what CRS has been up to and what we've done. So throughout fiscal year 19, CRS worked with African-American community leaders to address similar tensions and concerns over the racial targeting and subsequently strained relations between communities and law enforcement. Those tensions escalated in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and following the release of the video in May 2019.
Join the meeting.
Showing officers arresting a Black family while using what appeared to be excessive force. CRS worked to coordinate the city's first public listening session where African-American and Latino communities expressed concerns over the city's lack of accountability for police officers' actions. The participants and facilitators formed a working group and a coalition of community members to work together on longer-term community engagement strategies and propose solutions to Phoenix City officials. That's similar to what we are doing in Atlanta still. We are still forming and continuing to engage with Asian American and Pacific Islander and Hawaiian Native communities here in Atlanta so that we can help prevent these tragedies in the future and that we can respond more effectively because people will know who we are and what we have to offer in the future. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So what we have is a continuing, a number of several case studies that we could go into that level of detail for, but I'm concerned about the time that I have left. So if I could get a time check, because these are only supposed to be used as examples. And as you can see, there are plenty to go around the nation. Sacramento, Phoenix, and several others. This is a case that I was personally involved with in Cullowhee, North Carolina. It was the Western Carolina University Police Department. The chief of police contacted CRS for assistance. They wanted to strengthen relations between the police in the wake of those national protests that were sparked by George Floyd's death. So I got with the staff of the police department and discussed how to customize a framework for a police community advisory committee. And that's something that the university had never seen. They determined that the committee would include faculty members, staff, and students to provide a good, nice round range for input. And we implemented that committee, and it helped. The feedback is that the community collaboratively built trust through the ongoing engagement that it was created. Next slide, please. And I'll wrap these case studies up and move on to a wrap up. Yes, please keep going through Cleveland. We were involved in the Tree of Life and of course, the George Floyd case in Minneapolis. I personally also worked the Ahmaud Arbery case in Brunswick, Georgia. So this is how CRS can become a resource in your community. We looked at our services. Facilitation can take many forms. The first and most formal, where we actively convene and aid in dialogue, usually between joint sessions. I've talked already about training and consultation, and this is just kind of a wrap up of those restated with specific details on the programs that go into each of those boxes. So if we could, we can move on to the next slide, and I'll try and wrap up. As I said, CRS is about 30 employees large. We're spread across the country into 10 different regions. I am at the Atlanta, Georgia office here in the Southeast region. There is also a field office in Miami. And at the end of this
Why don't you go
presentation,
now, because Rita will be gone.
I'm sorry, what was that question? Was that a question for me?
No, Dion,
Okay.
you're okay. You can keep going.
Okay. All right. So I'll just leave the points of contact for how anyone can reach any of us in either of these 10 different regions, and my personal points of contact as well, so that they can be in the notes, and anyone can reach CRS before things get to a boiling point. We're much more effective if we can intervene before things spin out of control. Next slide, please. Are there any specific questions? I know that was a long briefing, but I feel like if there are questions specifically about, especially the Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiian, about the spa shootings here in Atlanta, I could address those. I think this would be a good time to do so. I'll also be available throughout the rest of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Dion, for that, for the helpful information. I actually also dropped in your contact information in the chat if they would like to reach out to you directly. We appreciate your invaluable support and information, especially in the community here in the Southeast.